Previously, on Palace of Mirrors, the Kraken has been hiding from pirate hunters. Who they are and where they came from isn't clear, but Bluebeard and the other pirates fear them. Meanwhile, Darien and Gent have formed a partnership to help Darien escape from the ship, but their plan lacks any clear details. And now, Season 1, Episode 21, All Was Drowning. Darien's reflection followed him as he paced the engine room, but the distortion of the engine aged him in the glass. An older man, lines on his face like the lines on the map, stared back. He slouched, like a roof beginning to cave under a winter's snow. The eyes of the doppelganger unsettled Darien the most. They were someone else's eyes, and yet they were also his own. Gent entered the room. "You spend too much time in here," says the ship's engineer. Gent stepped up beside Darien. Instead of a man in a crimson suit, his hand resting lightly on the ornate silver guard of his sword, the engine showed a boy wearing only rags. Gent turned his face, and the reflection shimmered back to normal. "I spend time here because it's my job. I don't stand around gawking like a tourist." "Gawking? I don't gawk. There's something about this place that helps me think." Gent shook his head. "You and the captain both," he snorted. "But this is a place for engineers, not dreamers." Darien studied the pirate a moment. "Have you seen yourself when you work here? You don't look like a man at work. You look like a devout believer." "I suppose that would make the engine my god," Gent chuckled. "For now, though, we have work, not worship. One of the ships in orbit has managed to track us down. They don't have our exact position yet, so we're going to lower our energy output and hopefully elude them for just a while longer." Darien frowned, considering the math. "We're already at the minimum standard that you told me. Can we actually lower it any further?" Gent put a hand on Darien's shoulders. "You should know by now, never trust an engineer when they tell you something can't be pushed any further. We always lie. That way when some fool comes along wanting to do the impossible, we can deliver." Gent guided them to the consoles built into the back wall of the room. Save his occasional interjection of instruction, they worked in silence. Only when they had finished the work did Gent look over at Darien to speak. "We're running out of time. We've bled this little world of yours dry, and now that one of those ships is closing in on us, this moon no longer even offers cover. You need to make your escape sooner rather than later." Darien's mouth went dry. "I know. I've been giving it some thought, and I think what our plan needs is a little classic misdirection. You told me Bluebeard knows what you're about, and I've seen that mountain of a man following you all over the ship. We'll never be able to get you out in one piece unless we come up with one hell of a distraction." Darien crept up to the engine, feeling a bit as though he crept up on a wild animal. Barely larger than his bald fist, it seemed too small a thing to lie at the heart of a starship. He held his hands out, as though warming them over a fire, but felt no heat. Gent flinched, probably remembering the last time Darien had stepped up to the engine. An idea had overtaken Darien as Gent talked, and now he found that he could think of nothing else. No other plan would work. He turned from the engine and struck Gent with his widest, maddest grin. The grin he had reserved for schemes he knew his father would never forgive. "I'm going to destroy the star engine." All the blood drained from Gent's face. "My ship? Without the engine?" "Shall fall from the sky," Darien finished the sentence. The engineer stared at the sphere a long, silent moment. He looked like a parent contemplating the loss of a child. When he'd found his words again, only a hint remained of his characteristic smirk. "How is it a farm boy is the maddest man on a ship full of madmen?" Gent and Darien crouched within the walls of the ship. They had found that only in here could they be confident twilight would not follow. The hulking man simply could not fit into the narrow space. Darien cradled a box of tools to his chest. Gent, for once, did not wear a velvet coat, but only a plain blue shirt. Still, it was a remarkable color that brought to mind the dark blue of the pond, shimmering with the breeze behind the farm. "Why do you all dress as though you want to set yourself apart from the others?" asked Darien. Gent glanced up from his work with a gentle scowl on his grease-smeared face. "Watch it! You take your life in your hands when you start psychoanalyzing a pirate to his face." "Psycho what?" Gent snorted. "Do I actually know a word you don't? I thought all you did for entertainment on that little farm of yours was read." Darien shrugged. "I didn't exactly have the most well-rounded education. My aunt did her best, but we only had access to a small selection of books." Gent reached out. "Hand me that soldering iron. No, not that one. The other one. Yes, there you go." So what does that word mean?" Gent snorted. "It's just a big fancy word that means you don't know how to mind your own business." Darien let out a short laugh. "Personal space wasn't exactly a thing growing up." Gent waved a dismissive hand. "I grew up on a spaceship. May not be as cramped as that farmhouse of yours, but it isn't exactly large. For example, I know more about death masks' bowel movements than is healthy for anyone. You'd think the Greater Circle didn't have any need for fiber the way he's always running to the toilet." Gent reached out grasping, and Darien handed him the wrench he knew the pirate needed. "That's not something I ever expected to learn from you," Darien frowned. "Wait, didn't you start this conversation telling me that I didn't know how to mind my own business?" Gent shrugged. "I never said you were the only one. Look, all I'm saying is everyone on this ship knows everything about every other person. Turns out there are no secrets on a pirate ship. Well, almost. No one knows anything about Dragon Eye, and Bluebeard has the captain's prerogative to keep to himself." They worked their way further into the access until they had reached the next junction. "I've been wondering, Bluebeard has been captain of this ship for a long time. Are you guys the only crew he's ever had?" "No, there have been others. Some died on the job, and others found some place they needed to be. Once or twice the captain has had to force the issue, when someone was too clueless to realize the time had come for them to move on." Sweat stung Darien's eyes in the stifling heat trapped between the walls. "Does it bother you? Betraying the captain, the crew? You grew up here." "Betray is such a harsh word. Why not say I'm setting them free of their misconceptions about my loyalty?" Darien smirked. "That's a bit of a mouthful. Betray is much more straightforward." Their work dropped into a rhythm, a companionable silence between them. Compared to much of the work Gent did on the ship, this basic maintenance required little thought or discussion. Still, Gent took care with even the simplest tasks. His soldering iron only ever touched exactly where it needed to, and only for exactly as long as required. He carefully tucked wires away, almost caressing them as he went. He never used unnecessary force, not even when a frustrating panel refused to open. "I've been wondering." Darien tried to find the words. Gent paused and looked up at him. "Let me guess, you have more to say about my fashion choices. What can I say? I like to look good." "No." Darien bit his lip and then dove in. "Can you do it?" Gent's face looked back blankly. "Do what? I mean, I'm good. I can do most things." "Can you really help me destroy this ship?" Gent's face tightened. It's just a ship after all, just metal and wires and an engine. Not even an especially big engine." "You expect me to believe that?" "What? The grimace of pain isn't giving you confidence about my resolve?" He waved a hand. "No need to answer that." He knelt down, and contemplated the length of the access. He caressed the conduit. Darien sensed the pirate needed a moment, so he waited quietly. At last, Gent looked up at him. I grew up alone, before the captain found me. I thought I would always be alone. Then I came on board this ship and she made sense to me, the way nothing else ever had. Here, between these walls, it's the only place I've ever truly fit. She's the one true companion I've ever had. Darien's stomach tightened, waiting for the blow, waiting for the moment Gent told him he couldn't go through with the plan. There's one reason, only one reason, I got to know the Kraken. Bluebeard, Darien murmured. Bluebeard. Gent stood with a gentle groan. That old man, I owe him more than I can ever say. All my life I've tried to repay him the only way I know how, with loyalty and skill and the occasional witty remark. He's one of the greatest pirates to ever live. Some of the stories I could tell you about him. He always knows which planets are ripe and when it's time to cut and run. He knows the markets that will give us the best price on our plunder, and I pity the man or woman up against him in a barter. Time and time again, he's gotten us out of scrapes where any other captain would have crashed and burned. He found a crew for the Kraken. He found us. And somehow, though we didn't know it at the time, we needed to be here. Gent rested a hand on Darien's shoulder. But there's something I've never wanted to admit, not even to myself. This ship, this life, they're destroying the captain. Every day when he strides onto the bridge for the first time, I see it in him. I see it in the sagging skin under his eye. I see it in the way he limps up to his chair. I see it in the way he collapses into his seat, and I hear it in the tremor of his voice. And then you had to go and break into our storeroom, and I saw on his face something I couldn't ignore, couldn't push down, couldn't deny. He looked at you like a drowning man who suddenly gets a gasp of air. And I thought to myself, is that any way to live a life? Always drowning? All these years, keeping the Kraken going, have I really been repaying him for saving me? Or have I been looking out for myself? Looking out for the thing I couldn't release my grasp on? Looking out for the place I belonged, the only place I thought I could belong in all the universe? I love this ship, Darien. I love it more than I've ever loved anything else, save that man. That damned fool of a captain who thinks that every choice we make is just a reflection of the will of an abandoned palace on a plain of dirt and dust and ruin. So I'll do it for him. I'll help you sink this ship. I'll free him from all its weight. For a moment they both stood, not working on the ship they meant to destroy, not speaking of the plan that would destroy it. They stood silent, a bond of trust between them that hadn't been there a moment before, though they had both saved one another from certain death. Then Gent laughed quietly and gave Darien a playful shove. They returned to work, and the hum of the star engine in the walls kept the time for them both. Darien rubbed the lump where Bluebeard had hit him and thought of the old man, anger freezing the features of his face, towering over him. It ached, a pain that nearly brought tears to his eyes. But the image wouldn't stay. It kept turning to Bluebeard sitting at Darien's bedside in the med bay. It kept turning to the shimmer in his eye when he spoke of Arlinda. The clouds parted before the ship, cloth before scissors. Kathy used to quilt after she told Darien his story for the night. The soft sounds of cloth had created a lullaby for him, something almost as comforting as the sound of her voice. Nothing reassured him after a nightmare more than peering out from under his covers to find her sewing. "Darien," Bluebeard's voice broke the memory. "Are you listening to me?" I'm sorry, Captain. I may have missed your order." Skeleton, as spindly and pale as his pirate name suggested, cackled from his post at the pilot station. His voice rattled like wind along an old fence. Bluebeard silenced him with a sharp look and turned back to Darien. "I asked for a report," his voice snapped. Darien ran his fingers over the console. Numbers and charts scrolled past. Once they meant nothing to him, had been just lines of gibberish, but Bluebeard had insisted Darien learn. Now he understood the data, which described his world and even the space that lay unseen beyond the clouds. He savored these exotic words. They tasted of Kathy's stories, but he still felt a distance from them. Gent had drilled him on the definition of words like solar wind and gamma ray, and Darien could recite them from memory, but they didn't truly mean anything to him. He had no context for them, no way to fit them into his understanding of the world. He felt as though he looked at an unfinished puzzle, the pieces scattered across the table. Scanning the sensor data, Darien wondered why Bluebeard insisted he continue his shift on the bridge. Why continue to train him at all? They both knew the path Darien had chosen didn't end with him on the ship. It ended with him free, or with him free from his life. Or could Bluebeard still believe Darien would turn aside and join him for good? Nothing unusual that I... He leaned forward, his mouth hanging open. Wait, I'm reading an energy source, 100,000 feet overhead. Nothing on radar, but I'm pretty sure it has to be a ship. Death Mask growled from the weapon station. Trying to hide like the cowards they are. Darien tried not to look at him. Too many times he'd seen the pirate watching him, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Instead, Darien turned his attention to Bluebeard. The captain frowned and leaned forward, contemplating the uncertain future hidden in the clouds. We're being scanned. They're doing it on a low-band frequency, probably hoping we won't notice them. The words rushed in a jumble from Darien's mouth. Bluebeard directed his attention to Skeleton at the helm. The pirate's skin, pale and nearly translucent, stretched over his gaunt frame. It gave the impression that no flesh lay underneath, only bones. His elongated face featured sharp cheekbones and sunken eyes of worn blue. Lose them, Bluebeard barked. I'll run them off the rocks. Skeleton smiled, a rictus of overstretched skin that looked like it would split at any moment. The Kraken tore the clouds and careened towards 6. The dampening field within the ship kept the crew from feeling the effects of momentum and inertia, but Darien still felt dizzy as he stared down at the ground. A small town lay there, long abandoned. The roofs had collapsed and the walls had crumbled. Only skeleton structures remained. Boulder-strewn hills surrounded the settlement. Could anyone have ever truly lived there? It felt impossible. The spindly trees and stony soil and gray sky all looked as though they should conspire against any soul foolish enough to try to call the world below home. A sense of despair overcame Darien. He had found a way out, against all the odds. He had found a way off 6. Could he really go through with a plan that would destroy his only escape? Yet, his mother and father had fallen in love on that world. Despite the boulder-strewn plains and the ravines with their teeth of stones and their gullets of darkness, they had fought for a life there together. They had dedicated their lives to turning that cruel land into something a family could live off, and his mother had given her life so Darien could be born. His sisters had chased him over those hills and through those forests. Kathy's voice had sounded on the air that surrounded the Kraken now as it plummeted down. All of it had happened down there, cradled between the teeth of the mountains. The Kraken left the ruins behind and sailed over hills and valleys. Those mountains lay ahead. From here they resembled towering beasts, their flesh stone and snow, more than they did geological formations that had arisen from natural forces acting upon the moon. Bluebeard stood in the center of the bridge, one hand on Night, the mountains reflected in his one eye. Darien felt a rush of something that could have been terror or anticipation. No one he had ever known or heard of had ever crossed the mountains and returned to tell the tale. The Kraken streaked between two peaks. Beyond lay a sea of mountains, their shadows heavy as night. Ravines flowed like rivers in the dark places below. Darien heard his sister sobbing in the back of his mind. "They're still closing," he spoke breathlessly. Was that because of the adrenaline from the chase, or was it the landscape below? "Lose them, you old sack of bones," barked Bluebeard. "Lose them." Skeleton howled and took the ship down and down and down into the gaping maw of a ravine. Six, as starved as the malnourished landscape suggested, swallowed them with relish. Darkness crushed the bridge. Even the overhead lights felt dim. Everyone looked like ghosts, the life stolen from their skin and their eyes in the darkness. Darien couldn't help but wonder if this is what it would be like in space, with only the distant stars for light. Six had only to close its mouth, and they would be lost in the deep dark. Darien squeezed his eyes shut. His pulse pounded in his ears, in the hollow of his neck, and in his chest. He hadn't felt fear this powerful since the day he stood in the circle with Fantasia. This world had given him everything, but it also promised to take everything in the end. "Darien," Bluebeard's voice, gentle and even, broke the fear open. "I know you're afraid, lad, but this isn't the time for fear. You have a job to do, small as it may be." Yes, sir," Bluebeard smiled. "The ship. Is it still on us?" Darien realized he had stopped looking at the screen, that he had stopped reporting on the enemy position. He looked down, and his eyes widened. "They've dropped into the ravine behind us. They're only a couple thousand feet back." Bluebeard bared his teeth and pushed Skeleton from his post. "I'll beg your pardon when we've gotten out of this alive." Bluebeard's hands danced across the controls, every bit as smooth as his movement in the dueling circle. An edge of acceleration fluttered in Darien's chest. Even the dampeners could not entirely counter whatever Bluebeard had the ship doing. He must have pushed the Kraken to its very limits. A creaking sounded, and somewhere a rivet popped. "What the hell are you doing to my ship up there?" Gent's voice crackled in the intercom. The old man smiled as he steered them around unseen pillars that Darien only knew existed because of the telemetry on his screen. The walls closed on either side until they flew just feet from destruction. Darien felt a surge of astonished joy as they cut the darkness and cheated death like characters from a story. Together they laughed, the captain and the boy. "You see, this isn't a time for fear. This is a time to face the darkness with a smile on your face." "The other ship is still closing," said Darien. "That thrice-cursed captain must think he has the palace itself on his side, to take a ship of that size down here and think he can keep up with my girl. She's been with me since the day I killed Arlinda." A floor panel groaned and snapped out of place with an ear-shattering crack. "I know we're in a death-defying flight for our lives and all that, but this ship still has to obey the laws of physics, and right now those laws are telling her to break into about 1,000 pieces. And seeing as how I'd rather not be in a ship plummeting out of the sky in pieces, I was wondering if maybe you could wrap up whatever it is you're doing." Gent's frantic voice barely registered with Darien or the captain. "Death mask," Bluebeard's voice did not so much as tremor, even as his fingers continued to dance over the controls. Fire 2 missiles on either side of the ravine. Bring the moon down on those bastards. Deathmask looked up from his console, his mouth a tight line on a pale face. That will bring it down on us. Are you or are you not of the Mahaji? Asked Bluebeard. For several heartbeats, Deathmask stared at Bluebeard. Darien kept the time by the thundering of his pulse. The darkness rushed past as Deathmask's face twisted, the tattoos crinkling into a jagged mess of lines, as though his face were a broken plate glued together with little care. He blinked and looked away from the captain, his fingers spasming on the controls. 2 lights spiraled into the ravine and demolished the darkness. In the flash of fire, Darien glimpsed buildings on the canyon floor far below. He had no time to wonder about what he looked at, to wonder if something similar had lain below him the day he and his sister followed the landslide down into the darkness. The explosions tore into the stone, and the walls of the ravine began to close, like a wound healing. Bluebeard pushed his hand forward, and Darien felt the ship leaping forward. A chunk of metal spun off the ship from somewhere ahead and disappeared from view even as alarms began to blare. Come on, muttered Bluebeard. You can do it. Don't let me down now. The ship wove and spun through the debris. Ahead of them, daylight was just visible through the haze of dust, but waves of rock cascaded down all around them. The thunk of stone on the hull sounded through the ship, so like hail, it brought Darien back to long-ago days. Bluebeard navigated the Kraken through the melee as though he and the ship were one and the same. The day opened before them. The barren lands stretched out. Darien drank the cloud-filtered sunlight as though he'd never tasted it, as though he had lived his whole life in darkness. Bluebeard stepped away from the helm and put a hand on Darien's shoulder. You can still change your mind, he gestured to the broken land. I saw on your face just now. You'll never be happy down there. You weren't meant to live on this cloud-choked world. Please, I have only to give the order, and we can break free into the stars. Darien stared down at his world. Below them, a scattering of trees struggled to survive on a ridge. This world was no place for a man to live. Only dirt and stone could thrive on a world that could never feel the unfiltered touch of a star. Amidst those shattered plains and towering mountains, soldiers had taken Marialla. Darien thought of her violet eyes, the way they had seemed to see him, the way no one else ever had. The heat of a blush rose up on his face. She had told him she liked her feet on solid ground. He hadn't understood, but now he thought maybe he did. Looking down, Bluebeard's hand heavy on his shoulder, he saw the gray dirt, the boulders, and the ravines. Nothing should be able to live down there, but still, the trees struggled on. My mind is made up, said Darien. Bluebeard went still. You're dismissed. Cal! Bluebeard spun away. Never use that name. My name is Bluebeard. My name will always be Bluebeard. I'm sorry, just leave. He sighed and collapsed into his seat. Next episode. The Kraken's cover has been blown, and Darien has no more time to plan. He must make a pitch to a hostile crew to convince them to give him a chance. Thank you for listening to Palace of Mirrors. If you liked the show, please give it a 5-star rating on your platform of choice and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy it. I truly appreciate your support. This podcast was produced, written, and narrated by Matthew Lindquist, with music by Nature's Eye on Pixabay.